Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the series on the history of Catholicism in the United States in the 20th century. Picking up in 1907, July 3rd, Pope Saint Pius X issued the second syllabus of errors. And the Latin title was Lamentabili, we lament. It condemned 65 propositions of modernism. And this formed the background for what is probably Pius X's most famous document, which came out later the same year, September 8th, 1907, the encyclical Pascendi Dominici Gregis, meaning feeding the Lord's flock. And the subtitle in English, On the Doctrine of the Modernist. It is in 15 enumerated sections in which he condemned modernism as, quote, the synthesis of all heresies. So to summarize, first category of problem that made modernism what it is. First, he traced it back to the Renaissance, anthropology, which, if you're interested, I have a whole playlist on the early modern period, which I cover the Renaissance. But to summarize the particular problem, the Renaissance anthropology, meaning the theology of man, or the philosophy of the human person, it took a quote from one of Plato's dialogues, the Protagoras. It took it out of context, but adopted it sincerely as as sort of the motto, summarizing the values of the Renaissance. And that motto is, man is the measure of all things. So a philosophy of pride. Pope Pius identified that as a blighted foundation, which led to the Protestant movement, which he described as a rebellion against authority, in the name of exalting the individual conscience over Scripture and tradition, the way the Catholic Church ascribes authority. And that led to, sequentially, to the rationalist deism and atheism, which exalted the individual intellect, relegating divinity to a construct of superstitious early man. That led to, in Pius's review of history, to ecclesial corruption, which deconstructed the sacred books of the Bible and just reduced them to the level of literary productions with accretions from antiquity, and dismissed the church hierarchy as something just invented. The papacy, bishops, that those are structures just invented by medieval monarchs. And then, as Pius continued, he said that led back to the beginning, in the condition of his own day. The anthropology of pride, the philosophy of pride, which seeks to remake the church according to the wishes of the individual, with variations on the demand for some version of ecclesial democracy. The only reason, he asserted, that more damage had not been done already was the protection of the Holy Spirit for the church, as well as the inability of prideful modernist conceit to form any unified plan of action, apart from a generalized concept of the past as having been primitive, leading up to their own day, which was a higher form of reality. But he saw, nothing positive about any development in the modern world, because from his experience, all he saw from the modern world was one attack after another against the church. Same year, 1907, September 29th, the foundation stone was laid for the Washington National Cathedral, which wasn't fully completed. In a sense, it's never really completed because they're always working on it, but it fully completed according to the original design in 1990. Now that's not ours. It's the National Cathedral is Episcopal. Same year, 1907, a peace treaty was finalized called the Triple Entente between formalizing the political alliance, a military alliance between England, France, and Russia against the rival alliance, the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire controlled most of what we think of now as the Middle East. And this is in continuity with the fear and instability created by the naval arms race, which I described in a previous video. And so Bismarck's alliance system, which had been a balance of stability in the late 19th century, was, from this point, 1907, transformed into an assurance of war, almost guaranteed, combined with the military plans, which I also talked about last time. Same year, 1907, an individual whose real name was Josef Vissarionovich Zhugashvili, better known by his name, his adopted name of Stalin. Stalin means steel. In 1907, he embarked on a life of crime in a heist. He carried out a heist. He stole 375,000 rubles from a transport of the State Bank of Tiflis in Georgia. Now that's the Georgia that's, well, it's on the eastern side of the Black Sea. So he was born in Georgia in 1879. Died later in 1953, but he did a great deal of damage before that happened. So he carried out this heist, not just for the standard criminal reasons, just to have the money, but he did it to support the professional revolutionaries of Lenin's Communist Party. This Stalin was born in the Caucasus Mountains on the eastern side of the Black Sea. He attended seminary for the Russian Orthodox Church. He was expelled from seminary for spreading Marxist propaganda, as Marxism is atheist, so of course that has no place in a seminary. And he joined Lenin's Bolsheviks after the split of the Russian Social Democratic Party in 1903, which we covered, I think, 2 videos ago. Same year, 1907, Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was a Russian physician studying conditioned reflex responses in dogs. Well, he really wanted to be humans, but he started with dogs by studying the salivary gland reaction. He conditioned the dogs. He made them accustomed to that whenever a bell rang, that they'd be fed. Food would appear. So he did that, and he measured when that happened how the salivary gland and so when the dogs got accustomed to it, when the bell rang, even before the food appeared, the salivary glands would run, and then it continued for a time. That even when he was not presenting the food, he would ring the bell and the salivary. So anyway, the Pavlov's. Pavlov's dogs. Anyway, so that's what that. 1908, June 29th. In terms of American church history, Pope Pius X did not trust the United States. In his eyes, it was a Masonic contrivance masquerading as a Protestant republic, which claimed to observe constitutional separation of church and state, but which in fact ensured the ascendancy of non-Catholic Christians in the country. In Pascendi, the document from 1907, in number 38, he had made a specific link between the heresy of Americanism, previously condemned in 1899, with modernism, which he had just condemned the year before in 1907. So here's one exemplar quote from section number 38. With regard to morals, they, meaning the modernist, adopt the principle of the Americanist, that the active virtues are more important than the passive, both in the estimation in which they must be held and in the exercise of them. And there are some modernists who, echoing the teaching of their Protestant masters, would like the suppression of ecclesiastical celibacy. It went on and on, So the current Catholics, would associate calls like that for making celibacy optional, or just eliminating it altogether. Associate that with the post-Vatican II period. But remember, nothing just happens. So they had a long, long sequence of events leading to that, and that argument's still going on. So in the following year, after it's 1908, another document. This was a Sapienti Concilio, which just means wise counsel. That was not encyclical. This is an apostolic constitution, in which he formally removed the United States from the status of missionary, of being a missionary land. So he removed it from the governing authority of the propagation of the faith, and moved it to an ordinary. So this meant that the bishops of the United States would from 1908 on, and still is the case, be under the direct governance of the papal curia, not filtered through the propagation of the faith, which is just one congregation in the curia. Same year, 1908, another step toward the First World War, bloodbath, was taken. Austria, which allied with Germany, remember, annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's on the eastern side of the Adriatic Sea, southeastern Europe. Now they annexed just means steal. That they just moved in and stole it. Now Bosnia and Herzegovina at the time were not controlled by the Bosnians and Herzegonovans. Instead, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. So Austria stole Bosnia-Herzegovina from the Ottoman Turks, who had previously stolen it from the Bosnians and Herzegonovans. The reason I say this is leads to the First World War, or one of the elements, is that Serbia had claimed that territory. Serbia claimed Bosnia and Herzegovina as part of Greater Serbia. So this annexation precipitated a war scare in which Germany sided with Austria and Russia sided with Serbia. Now, war was averted in the moment by diplomacy. But from that point on, the Balkans, that whole area of southeastern Europe, which is called that because of a mountain range that goes through the area, from that point the Balkans were referred to as the powder keg of Europe. Everybody understood, this is something bad was going to happen as a result of these conflicts. So the chain of mountains, the Balkans, run from Bulgaria, Serbia, and through other countries. So that the term is just used conventionally to refer to what is. We don't normally think of it as that, but it is in some ways a peninsula. It's surrounded on three sides by water of southeastern Europe. So the Adriatic on one side, the Ionian Sea on the other side, the Aegean, Black Sea. This is, and the Mediterranean, of course, to the south, and the Danube River and the Sava rivers to the north. Yeah, north. So this place, the Balkans, the powder keg of Europe in the early 20th century, includes the nations, what are now the nations of Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Greece, Macedonia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, Slovenia, and what's the name of it? Moldova. Each of those regions had its own history, culture, language, its own ethnic pride. So that added to the mix has been the continual influx of migrating and conquering peoples, because the region is a natural crossroads. So the Balkans in the 19th century and in the early 20th century had the same political factor as the Middle East today, that everybody knew it was a source of tremendous potential danger because of centuries-long issues, conflicts, and no one knew what to do about it. Russia, Austria, and the Ottomans had engaged in warfare for control over the region for centuries, literally for centuries, with the various territories changing hands multiple times. As if this were not complicated enough, there existed within each of those areas substantial this pop-up is getting in the way. Substantial movements, internal political movements for national sovereignty, that each one of those places wanted to be independent. Now, all those places were controlled, and at this point in 1908, either by the Austrians or the Turks or the Russians. But in the parlance of the day, this ideology was called national self-determination. Essentially, that each ethnic group should be politically autonomous, that each one should have their own country. So this inherently unstable situation was a breeding ground for radical movements of all kinds. Many of these groups, particularly the Marxist and the anarchist, filled the role that terrorists do today. In the sense, I mean, different motives, but because this wasn't religiously motivated, but their tactics were the same: bombings, arson, assassination, fomenting planned riots, but making it seem like it was spontaneous. Only they use the excuse of ideology instead of religion. But although in many ways ideology is a substitute for religion. So keep that in mind. That's the First World War did not just happen because the Archduke was assassinated. That was a trigger. But there was all long series of developments before that happened. Okay, 1909, March 4th, the 27th president was sworn in. That's back when it was March. Now it's been moved to January, but at the time it was March 4th still. And he was William Howard Taft. His vice president was James S. Sherman. Vice President Sherman died in office, and as this was prior to the adoption of the 25th Amendment in 1967, a vacancy in the office of vice president was not filled until the next election and inauguration. So Vice President Sherman served from 1909 until his death in 1912. And then 1912 and 1913, there was no vice president. Okay, the president, William Howard Taft, born September 15th, 1857. He served as 27th president from 1909 to 1913. Then, later, as the 10th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1921 to 1930. Which is when he died. He died on March 8th, 1930. As far as I know, Taft is the only person so far to have held both offices, President and Chief Justice. He was born into a wealthy family in Cincinnati, Ohio. After graduating from Yale Law School, he returned home to Ohio and set up law practice. Subsequently entered into local politics as a Republican. He served as a state judge, a U.S., so federal, Solicitor General, and a federal circuit judge. President Theodore Roosevelt had appointed him governor of the Philippines, the Philippine Islands, an archipelago of islands in the Pacific, which became a U.S. colony after we stole it from Spain, who had stolen it from the indigenous people 2 centuries earlier. Theodore Roosevelt, then appointed Taft Secretary of War, which was the title of the day, the cabinet position that we now call Secretary of Defense. In that capacity, Secretary Taft oversaw the building of the Panama Canal, which we alluded to in a previous video. When Theodore Roosevelt decided not to pursue another term in office, he supported Taft and helped him secure victory in 1908. But as president, Taft alienated both wings of the Republican Party by supporting both a tariff increase as well as prosecuting some of the large corporations under antitrust statutes. So he alienated, both the free traders as well as the monopolist. So then Roosevelt decided to run for another term, and which he could do because the amendment hadn't been passed yet that limited presidents to 2 terms. That was just a custom. So he tried. Roosevelt ran against the sitting president for the nomination of his own party as a Republican in 1912, but the party chose to stay with the incumbent, Taft. So Roosevelt then formed a third party. He moved in to take over the pre-existing Progressive Party, but renamed it to make it just his own ego creation, the Bull Moose Party. And that split the Republican vote, so that ensured that the Democrat would win, and that's Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is the one who would get us into the First World War. So Taft lost the election, and then he for a time he taught law at his alma mater, Yale Law School, until a future president, Warren Harding, appointed him 10th Chief Justice, and he held that until the year he died. Okay. So next, all right, we'll pause here because next we move into the next decade, the 1910s, and there we have to catch up with events in Mexico. Because there's a Mexican Revolution followed by a war that's going to take place, and that is going to lead to a great deal of refugees, fleeing the war, who were Catholic, and so that's going to be, an early 20th century immigration issue. Of course, immigration is still an issue, but it always has different reasons, and in this case, it was a civil war followed by. It was a revolution followed by a civil war in Mexico, so that'll take a few minutes, lay the background. So we'll pause here and pick up with the next decade next time. Thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.